Congress. My guest tonight, admirably enough, has not been afraid to step into the abortion firefight. As a candidate for the Republican presidential nomination, he stood out from the pack and was a champion of Roe versus Wade. Please welcome the senator from Pennsylvania, Arlen Specter. Arlen?
Good evening, Dennis. Good evening.
How are you?
I couldn't be better. Sitting here in Philadelphia, watching your show and enjoying it. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Now, you are the pro-choice Republican, sort of like being the vegetarian cannibal. How,
Well, there are a few more vegetarian cannibals in the Republican Party. Not too many. We could use a few more.
Now, obviously, you feel that it's one of the main tenets of this country is the separation of church and state, I would assume, and that we have to keep these two things separate. Is that correct?
Dennis, I think that's rock bottom. It's not just my view, it's Thomas Jefferson's view that we ought to have separation of church and state. That's a very, very fundamental principle.
Do you think that the federal government should in any way involve itself in this decision?
I think that it's a matter for the individual, a matter for rabbis, priests, ministers. I'm personally very much opposed to abortion, but I don't believe it's something that the government can control. I think that the government, the political system, ought to focus on items like a balanced budget, like crime control, like national defense. What I would like to do is take abortion out of politics. I think Barry Goldwater, the conservative conscience of the Republican Party, for years said it best when he said, keep the government off our backs, out of our pocketbooks, and out of our bedrooms. I think it's a personal matter.
Now, when you take what appears to me, to be...
Dennis, I think I got more applause than you did that time.
What's that?
I think I got more applause than you did, Dennis. I don't want to get into a battle.
Keep that up, Arlen. I'm going to cut off this interview in midterm.
No, I don't think you'll cut it off, but if we get into a battle, I'm sure I'll come out on the losing end. You've got the microphone in the audience.
No. Well, now, when you take good common sense pragmatism like that into the Senate chamber, how is it received? I mean, that seems to make so much sense to me, what you've just said. Where do your fellow senators stand on this? Is it split pretty even, or do most of them lean one way or another? What do you detect?
Well, most of the Republicans disagree with me, but my colleagues in the Senate who are Republicans don't want to make it a big issue. They would really like to put it on the sidelines and concentrate on areas where we can agree. What I found when I ran for president, Dennis, was that there were a lot of people out there, Republicans, who were pro-choice, but they weren't active in the primary process. The primary process seems to attract people way over here on the Republican side and way over here on the Democratic side, and the people who are in the center tend to stay home. And what I was trying to do was to get them off the sidelines and onto the playing field. And I think there are a lot of centrists, but they don't come out in primaries.
Isn't there some way that we can use our heads and get to the point where, when you hear, like, stories that are diametrically opposed in the same 10 minutes on the newscast, when you hear stories about the ascending rate of abortions vis-a-vis people who can't adopt babies in this country, isn't there some system, a simple system somewhere down the road where we could convince people maybe to, if they do want to bring the child into the world and have it adopted, and link people up before it ever happens, some prenatal let's make a deal? Isn't that possible, that we could work that out somewhere?
I think that is possible, and when I ran for the presidency, I began to talk to a lot of people that I hadn't discussed things with before. Pat Buchanan, for example, although I disagree with ideas, I got to know him. Ralph Reed Jr. And what I have been searching for is a way to bring the country together. And I have legislation which I'm about to introduce on abstention. I'm the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, and there is a program, Title 20, where I would like to see more federal funding. I would like to try to eliminate the problem of the abortion issue before it arises by trying to get teenagers, especially a tremendous number of teenage pregnancies, trying to eliminate those unwanted pregnancies through abstention, and then to try to give tax breaks for adoption. My legislation would give a $5,000 tax credit for adoption, so that In the political process, what I'd like to do is find areas of agreement where we can try to sort of sidestep the abortion problem by first preventing unintended pregnancies, and secondly, where they occur, to try to encourage adoption.
Will you be introducing that legislation personally, or will you be doing so in absentia?
I'll be doing it. I'll be doing it collaboratively. Some things two people do, Dennis.
Oh, believe me, I've done my share of collaborating, Arlen.
Some things like legislation, you can get a lot of co-sponsors, and I'm going to have quite a number of co-sponsors, perhaps in the next week or week after next, to introduce the legislation. My colleague in Pennsylvania, Senator Rick Santorum, is my primary co-sponsor.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have a phone call for you, Arlen. It's line 6 from Rick Santorum, from Angela from Canton, Michigan. Angela, go ahead. You're on with Senator Arlen Specter. Got a question?
Hello, Angela.
Congratulations for your 50th show, dude. My question was for either you or the senator. Do you think parents of teenagers underage should be able to have a say in if they should get an abortion or not, especially if they're going to have to take care of both of them?
Yeah, should it be their parents' call, or you say the individual makes the call, but what happens when they're underage, Arlen?
Well, I think that the parents should have a say in it, but I don't think that the government ought to pass a law which requires that the parents have a say in it. I think that parents have to work a relationship with their children so that they talk to them about sex, and they talk to them about abstinence. And if there is a pregnancy, then the child has a good enough relationship with the parents so that it is discussed. Some states have laws which require parental consent for a young woman under 18. And if there is a bad relationship, there's what is called a judicial bypass, where the teenager can go to a judge and get authorization for an abortion. But I think that what we ought to work in our society is so that the relationship between a father, mother, and the child is such that there be a natural discussion without having the government intervene.
Line 7, we got Richard from Atlantic City. Richard, what's your question?
Hi, Dennis.
Hi.
As
Hello,
usual,
Richard.
your closing part of your monologue really hit the nail on the head. I completely agree with you. I want to compliment you on it.
Thanks, Dick.
And I just wanted to ask Mr. Specter if he feels that his views on abstentia are as realistic as his views on the single bullet theory.
Wow, what was that? I think he just asked if you were doing a doobie when you came up with a single bullet thing.
I'm glad you brought that subject up, because I haven't heard about it since noontime today.
You are rough, Specter. You are.
Listen, Dennis, if you'd come up with a single bullet theory, you'd be rough by now too. You have to learn how to protect yourself. The single bullet theory happens to be correct. It's been analyzed by a lot of independent sources, by the House Investigation Committee, and it's correct. I'd be glad to tell you why if you want to know.
Well, I think that's for another show right now,
Okay.
Arlen. But I don't know. I've read up on the single bullet theory, and I believe everything you say. Okay. I'm just teasing you. Well, listen, I appreciate your moxie coming on and talking about this, because we live in times now where even if you try to have some sort of cogent conversation about the issue of abortion, everybody gets tensed up. And I do think it's the one thing that might be unsolvable in this culture. Do you ever think that, I guess people are never going to come completely together on this, are they?
Well, Dennis, let me tell you for just a minute about a couple of visits I've made recently. One to a high school in Pittsburgh, which has an abstention program. They got a $250,000 grant from the Department of Health and Human Services, which my subcommittee funds. And I talked to a young woman who was 18, who had a child when she was 15, unintended. And she goes to the 7th grade and counsels 12-year-olds. And she tells them what it's like to have an unintended child, how it disrupts her education, how it disrupts her life, and what the problem is potentially with disease and the lowering of self-esteem. And I have a sense that she can have a real impact. And recently I visited a teen group in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where the young girls, 12, 13, 14, are making pledges for abstinence. And when they get into a tough situation in a back seat or a compromising way, they've already learned what to say. If somebody says, well, if you really love me, you'll let me, to respond, well, if you really love me, you'll understand my feelings.
Boy, it's a complicated world, though, Senator Specter, when we have our babies teaching our babies. But I guess the times, they are a-changing, huh, and we got to go with it. I appreciate you coming on. I've got to do the news right now. Thank you. Senator Arlen Specter, ladies and gentlemen.